A few minutes ago, you mentioned Wesley Law, who was a longtime president of the NAACP in Savannah, a man whom I knew fleetingly, but an impressive guy. Did other people who sat in this chair have said, well, there was a man in my town who was a leader in race matters, civil rights things, and he was pointed out to me as somebody, not that I ought to imitate, but just somebody doing things for the race. Was Mr. Law?
Oh, he was revered.
Yeah.
I mean, in our household. I mean, the W.W. Law, we called him. It was, he was a mailman, and he was very active. He was a leader. He was someone who was very supportive, and, you know, we disagreed on things, some matters years later, but those disagreements didn't change things with me and how I looked at him. But he was just a man who stood up when it looked like it was dangerous to stand up. You know, he was one who said, this is wrong, and I'm going to work to make changes. The other people that I didn't know who were revered in our household, again, Phyllis and Aaron. Aaron Kravitz was a local lawyer in Savannah who happened to be Jewish and allowed black lawyers to use his law library and things like that. And his daughter, Phyllis Kravitz, who's now in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. They were revered in our house. And there were any number of others who would fight back or who would actually show up to the meetings. And that's what my grandfather would talk about, who showed up and who didn't show up, who had property to use for bail money and who refused to allow their property to be used. There was another gentleman in our area, Sam Williams, who was a friend of my grandfather, who was also involved.
So these people are held up to you as exemplars.
Exactly.
They're doing things, and not necessarily that you have to do these things, but they're doing things that are admirable and setting an example for others. And the ones who don't do these things are, in effect, letting the community down.
I think it was different then because they didn't always agree on what it was they should be doing. And as you remember years later, when some of us became very radical, we actually were critical of the sort of go slow approach or people working within the system. But my grandfather's attitude was that you should do something. You should not just sit and do nothing. And you didn't have to always agree on what that something was. But you don't just accept the status quo because you are lazy or you're fearful. And they were shown as examples of people who actually took the risk and made the effort to do something.
Even if it was something that you didn't necessarily agree with, they were doing something.
They were doing something.
As opposed to those who did nothing at all.
Exactly.